Good morning, friends. Welcome back to our Ways with Words. Today we are dealing with the poetry section, second poem, Ode to Autumn by John Keats. In this video, I am trying to give you some background information on the poem. To talk about John Keats, born in 31st October 1795 and died in 1821, February 23rd, at the early age of 25, affected with tuberculosis. He was an English romantic poet. He was one of the main figures of the second generation of romantic poets, along with Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, despite his works having been in publication for only 4 years before his death from tuberculosis at the age of 25. Although his poems were not generally well received by critics during his lifetime, his reputation grew after his death, and by the end of 19th century, he had become one of the most beloved of all English poets. He had a significant influence on a diverse range of poets and writers, like George Louis Borges stated that his first encounter with Keats' work was a greater experience that he felt all of his life. And the style of Keats' poetry, it is heavily loaded with the sensualities that is one of the features of Romanticism. It is reflected most in his series of odes. And his poems always accentuate extreme emotion through an emphasis on natural imagery. Today, his poems and letters are some of the most popular and most analyzed in English literature. Some of his most acclaimed works are Ode to a Nightingale, Sleep and Poetry, and the famous sonnet on first looking into Chapman's Homer. Let me talk you about Romanticism and what is its features. As I told you, John Keats was the second generation. He belongs to the second generation of Romanticism. And it is a name given to a dominant and important movement in literature and other arts, particularly music and painting, in the period from 1770s to the mid-19th century. It started with the publication of lyrical ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge in 1789. It is regarded as transformed artistic style and practices. And like many other terms applied to the movements in the arts, the word covers a wide and varied range of artists and practices. It is retrospective term. It was a European phenomenon, and especially it became powerful in Britain, France, and Germany. And just we can have a look at the features of Romanticism. What make a romantic poetry? Wordsworth and Coleridge's lyrical ballads gives the terms and rules to discuss, to evaluate, to criticize a poem in terms of Romanticism. According to them, poetry is an emotional and imaginative spontaneity. Poetry comes as a spontaneous a sudden overflow of imagination, of emotions. Other than talking about something objective, the theme of the poem should be self expression and individual feeling. And it always reflects to nature and it is divinity. And it becomes a religious response to nature. And the poet should have a capacity for wondering each and every elements in nature. Poet should have a mind of or innocency of a child's vision, as child is considered as the father of humans according to them. And they give importance on imagination as a positive and creative faculty, and an interest in primitive forms of art, that the traditional forms of art, just like ballads, folk songs, it paves way to the old tradition of art. Now let me give you some instances from the life of John Keats. He was, at the time of his death, he was engaged to Fanny Brown or Frances Fanny Brown Linton, and he was so much influenced by her, and some of his works mentions her name. His letters to her were discussed a lot. When he caught up with the tuberculosis, he has to move to Rome to take rest, to have a warm weather. There he died. At that time, the message of his death got her after a few months. She spent 6 years mourning for him, wearing a black dress, cutting her hair, and she studied Italian language and tried to translate some of his work just like that. Now let us talk about our poem Ode to Autumn. And it is composed, written on 19 September 1819 and published in 1820 in a volume of Keats' poetry that included the famous poems like Lamia and The Eve of St. Agnes. To Autumn is the final work in a group of poems known as Keats' 1819 Odes. As I told you, he has to stop his literary career early because he has to cope up with a lot of financial problems. First, he was working as an assistant surgeon. Later, he has to move from another job, another profession. He has to support his family financially, so he has to wind up his literary career earlier. Although personal problems left him little time to devote to poetry in 1819, he composed two Autumn after a walk near Winchester one autumnal evening. The work marks the end of his poetic career, as he needed to earn money and could no longer devote himself to the lifestyle of a poet. A little over a year after the publication to Autumn, Keats died in Rome. Now let us talk about the form of the poetry. Ode to Autumn, written in ode form. What is an ode? An ode is a form of lyric poetry expressing emotion, and it is usually addressed to someone or something, or it represents the poet's musings on that person or thing. As Keats' odes tells us what he thought as he looked at the Grecian urn. Let me explain it. In Ode to Grecian Urn, he is addressing an earn. In Ode to Nightingale, another poem by John Keats, he is addressing Nightingale the bird. In this Ode to Autumn, he is addressing the season autumn, addressing poem, talking about it. It can be on person or something. And in this poem, the word ode comes from a Greek word for song. So ode means song in Greek. And like a song, an ode is made up of verses and can have a complex meter. So that is all in this video. And next video we will be moving to our poem in detail. Okay, thank you.